Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Soul Seeds, where Johanna is my guest expert for today. And Johanna is a clinical therapist and an energy worker. And in this episode, we are going to talk about inner child healing. So I would love to know more about like how important is it to like listen to our inner child to start that healing process.
That's a really good question. I think that it actually shows up a lot more than we think, right? If we
Mm,
are maybe in a conflict or feeling emotionally charged about something, or something just annoys us and we just can't identify it,
mm-hmm,
check in with yourself. What
mm-hmm.
age of you is trying to show up in that moment to try to protect, try to
Oh,
be
that's a
seen,
good
try to be
question.
heard?
Yeah. Yeah, because usually
And
we tend to say, okay, where does this come from? Why am I reacting like this? But
mhm,
when you say it like that, you go a lot deeper already.
mhm.
Mm,
Yeah, and also being cognizant about the words that we're using, right? Like
mm,
why or judgment words will definitely provoke, the nervous
mm,
system a little bit because we're judging ourselves. And so there's an
mm,
internal conflict there.
mm. And when I talk to others, about inner child healing, they always say it's at the foundation of really our healing journey. Would you agree with that?
I think that's a really good point. I think it can be foundational. I think
Hmm.
depending on how much work you've done,
Right.
I don't think it's necessary that we have to go back and unpack everything from the very root and come
Hmm.
back up. Just kind of things that are, like spot treatment, like, oh, okay, this seems to be really triggering for me. Why am I reacting like this? And then
Right.
exploring your own, uh, how you present and how you show up like that.
Hmm. Yeah, and when you mention the word reacting, there's quite a difference between reacting and responding. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, because when we
Yeah.
react, it tend to be a bit more. It's more direct. It's coming from a lot of emotion, and it's not so much without thought. So could you explain a bit more or a bit better the difference between those two?
Yeah, absolutely. And I am intentional when I use that word is when we're
Mm,
reactive, right? It's just kind of like you're poking at an animal, right? Eventually they're going to
mm,
react. React
right.
is more of a defense. Like I need to defend myself, I need to protect myself. And
Mm,
so I make that when we're talking about any kind of healing, right? How are you reacting?
mm,
Because it's kind of at a default, right? It's a subconscious thing that for survival
right. Right.
tactics, it for
Yeah.
sure stems from there. And when we respond, it's a little bit more neutralized. It's like, okay,
Hmm.
how am I going to respond to this email, this text message, or whatnot,
Right.
right? So
Yeah.
it for sure provokes different neural pathways when
Hmm.
we're even just talking, checking in with ourselves and talking to our inner selves. Like, what are we doing with this? How do we feel about this?
Mm. And how important is like even self-worth and self-love in this whole inner child healing journey really that we're on?
Yeah, so that's incredibly important.
Hmm.
It's often, I've heard it over and over, and it's often said that, when we grow up in unhealthy environments,
Hmm.
typically the child doesn't grow up to, hate the abusers or the toxicity or any of that. It's kind of internal. We try to
Right.
rationalize and take blame. So that's
Mm,
a huge process. And one of my favorite activities to suggest is writing a letter to your younger self, a letter from where
mm,
you are now, and
mhm,
kind of to them, we're safe. Just kind of reaffirming them because part of that still needs to be seen. That's why it shows up. That's why it's like,
mhm,
hey, be seen, heard, validated, protected,
mhm,
whatever purpose it's serving. There's kind of like that wound that needs to be cleaned out a little bit.
mm. Yeah, because the inner child, it comes up in those, like you mentioned already, those situations where you suddenly react to something and you're like, where is this coming from? So it's definitely that digging a little deeper that can tell you where that is stemming from, and usually it goes back quite a while way, I can say.
Yeah,
Mhm,
absolutely. Even if we use the example of, maybe in the household, you're not feeling heard. Oftentimes when we don't feel heard, we get louder instead of,
mm,
try a different method. So that's one example, right? And so what happens is now in adulthood, we may present that same way because those are
mhm,
the tools that you have access to because that was the norm. That's what was that you know how to function in that. So
mhm,
when you hear yourself raising your voice or getting louder, what does that mean? Oh, I remember being a child and not feeling heard and having
mhm.
to try to raise my voice or overtalk somebody.
And how can we create for ourselves like this safe space for that inner child to be heard, really?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good question and identifying where that's coming from. And it doesn't have
Mhm,
to be exact, but just having some kind of awareness because when we're on these autopilot loops,
Mm-hmm.
awareness is such a beautiful place to be, even if we're still kind of caught in the loops, because that
Mm-hmm.
offers us the building foundation to be able to insert a different template, a different
Mm-hmm.
we can disrupt it with something, right? So if maybe, as the example used, if I'm kind of yelling and I'm doing these things to feel heard, once I have that in my awareness, it's like, okay, what can I
Mm-hmm.
replace that with? Okay, 7-year-old Joanna, I hear you, I see you. We're gonna protect you. We're okay. We don't need to do that. Just kind of soothing that inner child that tries to come up and
Mm-hmm.
protect you in the now.
Mm. And what are some of the best ways that you can like converse with that inner child besides like you said, writing a letter to yourself? Are there some other techniques that you can do that?
Yeah, forgiveness letters to yourself. I
Mm-hmm.
know I mentioned writing letters to yourself. Another really fun one that I find enjoy is coloring. Coloring actually helps a lot of different things, even anxiety of that search, because the lines are already there. So really, it's kind of like a mindless activity and helps soothe the nervous system. But coloring specifically with a non-dominant hand is pretty healing to the inner child.
Mm. And we've kind of lost touch with that inner child, but also through the in the sense of play. I mean, we don't allow ourselves to really be mindful in playing, really,
Yes.
in having those activities where you don't have to certainly like reach a goal or achieve something, but just have fun. So how important is that for that connection with that inner child to just play?
Yeah, so that's part of the beauty with using the non-dominant hand is because we
Mm-hmm.
get out of our adult mindset, right? And things are not
Mm-hmm.
perfect. Things are not, the differences when we color are going to show up vastly different. So you're honoring the little child in that the where perfectionism wasn't a thing, and maybe like I'm going to go out of the line, or this
Mm-hmm.
doesn't look XYZ, all these judgment things that we kind of develop over the years. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
in absence of that, so there is going to be maybe some discomfort and a little bit of a struggle while doing it, but it's
Mm-hmm.
so healing for your inner child. And oftentimes, maybe if you're at the store and you're like, I love unicorns, right? That for
Mm-hmm.
sure would be an inner child coming
Yeah.
out, right? And so, like an expression there, it's just honoring that. Go grab it, touch it, feel it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just
Right.
kind of sit with it in that moment, and you honor these little pieces of yourself that honor healing as you acknowledge is what
Mm-hmm.
it's really about. Is just acknowledging it when it comes up.
Yeah, because when you mention, writing with the other hand, not the dominant one, or we're so used to being conditioned like that, or it has to be perfect, or that's where the perfectionist comes in. What does the perfectionist have to say to like the inner child?
Right. And so that's a part of the exercise is being able to know that it's not going to come out perfect. And it offers this kind of like a subconscious level of forgiveness already, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I was
Right.
to go on with my dominant hand and start coloring a little pony, it's going to look a lot different than I would have at 5 years old. So when you use
Mm-hmm.
a non-dominant hand, it's more childlike, more
Right.
play-like. It opens up a different creativity neural pathway as well as a
Mm-hmm.
healing, because you do kind of just you're easy on yourself. You're more forgiving and gentle because you
Mm-hmm.
kind of have that, you know what to expect, that it's not going to come out as similar as it would if you used your dominant hand.
Mm. And would you advise also to talk to your inner child like you would talk to your best friend?
Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. That's just kind of like your inner adult, right? And just giving yourself grace and just giving yourself forgiveness in all aspects. And I think a lot of it comes down to is acknowledging that the inner child wants to come up and try to protect you. It wants to try
Mm-hmm.
to help you. And so speaking to that and just saying, hey, little Joanna, I don't need you to do that. We're safe. We're going to be okay. And just affirming that, so then you heal it, so you can disrupt that loop. So it's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of forgiveness and
Mm.
kind of letting
Yeah.
go. I don't need you
Yeah,
to show
because
up.
when I also hear the word like inner child healing, a lot of shame usually
Yes.
is connected to it for a lot of people. So how can we get rid of that shame? I think that's one of the deepest core emotions that is tied to that.
Yeah, and the shame is there because there's this disconnect between the adult us and the child us, right? And we will often keep them separated on purpose, right? We
Right.
intellectualize that. As
Mm-hmm.
adults, we can talk about shame, but when we talk about a 5-year-old talking to you about shame, you will almost certainly hold space for them differently, and
Mm-hmm.
honoring that sameness for yourself. So again, it's kind of about slowing down and just, a 5-year old, if a 5-year old is trying to regulate their emotions. You're not going to dismiss them, and maybe that was part of your own
Mm,
narrative. You're going to
right.
hold space differently. What were you needing? Kind of checking in. What were you needing at that age, and how would you show up different for somebody of similar age? So kind of
Mm,
externalizing it a little bit,
right.
because you're feeding in, that's input you're feeding into your inner child, but also to your adult
Mm.
self.
And can you also ask like, okay, what can I give you today?
Yes, that's a beautiful one. What are you needing today? You're
Hmm.
needing a hug? Okay. You're needing
Right.
to lay down for 5 minutes. Honoring yourself, honoring your inner child.
Hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
And
That
by
can be a little
honoring that child,
uncomfortable.
you can grow into a more calm and safe and regulated, well,
Yes, and
adult,
that's what it's
really.
about.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much for today, Joanna. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.